My name's Professor Michael Dobson. I'm the director of the Shakespeare Institute, which is a little research department of the University of Birmingham, which is kept in Stratford-upon-Avon, to be close to the Royal Shakespeare Company, close to the archives of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. And I should say we are celebrating our 75th anniversary this year. So if you want to come to a party, come to Stratford, come to the Shakespeare Institute, meet our lovely honorary fellows and ourselves. I'm absolutely thrilled to be in Craiova again. Craiova, which is like Stratford that has died and gone to heaven. You know, Stratford has been trying to keep a Shakespeare festival going continuously every day since 1769, and its very small resources are scarce. There's only a certain amount one can do with one resident theatre company and some academics and some tourists and a little market town. Craiova, for at least a week every 2 years, can just be the riches of the world's engagement with Shakespeare in every possible way, shape and form. And since I started coming to this festival in 2010, 16 years ago, I've watched it expand to become easily the largest Shakespeare festival in the world. Now, I mean, the direction has very much accelerated in the direction of enlargement over the last couple of iterations. There are now sections on providing Shakespeare for 0 to 3-year-olds, companies taking performances of Shakespeare into retirement homes, every demographic catered to, as well as most of the world's major languages. And I was delighted to see a concentration of Japanese Shakespeare over the first couple of days of the festival. Admittedly, I missed the free sake in the streets, I missed the drone show, I missed a lot of Japanese pageantry offered with the support of the Japanese embassy on the first day, because in the troubled times in which we live, the world's transport networks are not as secure as they once were, and even Wizz Air, that remarkable Hungarian operation which provides direct flights to Craiova, is occasionally affected. I was travelling with Flute Theatre, of which I'm a trustee. They've been performing here, and we spent 9 hours together at Luton Airport talking about all the free sake we ought to be having on the streets of Craiova and all that Japanese pageantry. However, I caught up with the Kakushinyan Titus Andronicus, which I was able to enjoy the following night, and I saw the Japanese modern dance Romeo and Juliet, and the remarkable fringe show by a company called, is it Camus Pennant? It's something Pennant. A show called Hamlet Toilet. You know, to pee or not to pee, but they didn't even use that gag because it probably doesn't work in Japanese. An amazing show, 3 actors wearing white latex tight bodysuits, taking the existential questions of Hamlet in terms of constipation. You know, Hamlet was possessed by his father's spirit in the lower intestine and was struggling with everything really mainly in a toilet cubicle. Fascinatingly graphic. I felt very seen by it in ways that weren't at all comfortable. Some parts of it I found at first inexplicable, even with surtitles. The confession scene, the equivalent of Claudius's penitence, took place with 2 of the actors taking it in turns to wear white helmets while white pebbles were dropped onto their heads from what looked like a drain pipe. This went on for a long time while the actors were reciting passages from Martin Luther, from the Bible, from Thomas à Kempis, mainly Christian penitential texts, apart from a tiny quotation from Ziami, the great Japanese no playwright, which, you know, I was surprised to find there. And when I asked the director/writer in a Q&A session after the show what this bit had been all about, what were the white pebbles, I was told it was to do with the Japanese nuclear accident of 2011. Japanese people tell you things that mean that particular nuclear accident, you know, surprisingly often it seems to me. But it's clearly a great national trauma that manifests in all kinds of ways, apparently including white pebbles falling out of drain pipes onto people's heads. It was all about radiation, and indeed that came up in the Titus, which was a sort of student tragedy review kind of style, big, showy, quite rough-edged, not particularly rigorous in its dealings with the text. It had some interpolations, made some quite surprising cuts. I mean, it seemed to me that some of the most promising and fruitful stuff in the second half of Titus they'd chosen to go without, so he didn't pretend to be mad to camouflage his plans for revenge. They didn't have the scene with the fly, they didn't have the murder of the nurse, and Marcus and Lucius didn't have to survive at the end, which in a way they got off lightly. I mean, they were just killed in the general bloodbath in this production. And there were some odd interpolations. Ovid turned up in person. A figure called the upstart Crow, who had a ruff and a kind of black fishnet body stocking, stalked around and spoke as the author. This was Shakespeare, doubling the role of Aaron, the villain, which was an interesting thing. And some very sententious editorializing passages were added where a child, played by a grown woman, asked, well, is this what the world's like that I'm going to be born into? And does it have to be like this? And was sort of given various lessons, which, you know, I could have done without that. But I was pleased that in a scene early in the second half of the lighting all going red, the characters all being draped in a kind of metal foil, which reflected the red light superbly, somebody dressed as a dinosaur turned up, waving Ovid's text, and clearly being a version of Godzilla. You know, yet more of that radiation trauma that Japanese popular culture is absolutely glowing with at all post-war times. So very lively, very energetic Titus. You know, nothing to compare with Percorates all those years ago when it comes to really, you know, going through that text and taking every detail of it very, very seriously. But yeah, a splashy and energetic gesture towards Titus. Very long end sequence where a curtain rose at the back of the acting area. There were very bright lights shining in the audience's face, the noise of war from off stage, the child riding round and round and round on a bicycle, and a sort of peace-loving pop song broadcast very loudly over the tannoy. I thought, yeah, if the big stage effect that you think is the summation of what you're doing is a loud pop song, then, you know, just book a band. You know, don't bother with all this ex-Elizabethan dialogue. You know, maybe they need to make some choices there. But even so, a perky sort of evening. One innovation of the festival this year is that some of we pedants, the academics, the European Shakespeare Research Association Performance Studies Seminar, which gets together every day to talk about the shows and process them and talk about the various projects we're engaged in analysing what's happening in Shakespearean performance around the world, we have been co-opted, to our great delight, to run question and answer sessions in the auditoriums with theatre personnel straight after shows. So we can ask our questions in English usually, but with interpreters available, absolutely on the spot, and any audience members who want to hang around and ask questions themselves and hear what the director, what the actors thought they were doing, can do so, and we can guide that. So I had the great pleasure of talking with the two dancers who did Romeo and Juliet, or a modern dance piece that was an interpretation of Romeo and Juliet, which I found slightly perplexing, because the great thing about modern dance, as I understand it, is that it emancipated itself from narrative. No, old-fashioned interpretive dance, like classical ballet, like, you know, Macmillan's choreography to the Prokofiev Romeo and Juliet score and so on, tended to be just like mime, like pantomime. It was just acting out the story, only for some weird reason the people were very fit and they didn't speak, as with the Fontaine-Nureyev Romeo and Juliet ballet that was filmed, and so everybody knows it very well. They were mainly, it seemed to me, rather vague. The two dancers, when they were on stage at the same time, didn't really engage with each other. They touched each other very little. I mean, phenomenal dancing, but its relation to Romeo and Juliet as a dramatic text seemed quite peripheral. They would each take a solo and then they would both be there, but it seemed to be as much about their isolation from each other as about anything thrilling happening to them, until suddenly we got a sequence in which Juliet very mimetically drank some potion and went to sleep. And then the Romeo dancer came in and drank some poison and lay motionless next to her, and she woke up and mimed stabbing herself with a dagger, and one thought, well, perhaps it's all over. But of course it wasn't. They then had some sort of posthumous further dancing. So it seemed a funny combination of the abstract and the very literal. At least in that one very literal sequence. The music they'd chosen, well, it was one of Strauss's four last songs, first played on a cello and then later on the same song actually sung in the original German. And lots of romantic, rather regretful, melancholy, 19th century, familiar, Chopin-like regretful music. It was mainly in the same key and certainly in the same register. It seemed to be as much about a sort of delicate regret about what happened to Romeo and Juliet, rather than any urgent sense that this was all about these terrible young energies that had been cut short and this terrible civic breakdown that expressed itself through this particular bit of narrative. And I found what the dancers said characteristically incomprehensible. Not that they didn't speak beautiful and very eloquent English, it's just, it never seemed like what I would have regarded as an answer to the questions that were put. You know, dancers, many of them are highly intellectual, highly theoretical, and they've got lots and lots to say about the patterns of what they do and the way the body works in space and the way meaning works in space. But when you ask them about Romeo and Juliet, or what their interpretation of Romeo and Juliet is doing, even in some fairly pragmatic ways, you tend not quite to get that. But you know, this is a phenomenal choreographer. He's now in his early 70s and can still dance Romeo, and has a great career behind him, and I hope more of it ahead of him too. Last night's discussion after the show I found much more compelling, but then it's a show I very, very much like, and it's certainly been the best thing I've seen here so far, and that's a play called Halt, H-A*L*T, which is the word Hamlet with me taken out of it. It's the word Hamlet turned into a word for stop, and it's also used as an acronym over the course of the show. H for hungry, A for angry, L for, what's the L for? Lonely, and T for tired. This is a show put together by a theatre company from Kiev in Ukraine, who just before the full-scale invasion in 2022 were about to open their production of Hamlet. Their production of Hamlet was cancelled. It has never happened. And in this play, written by Tamara Trunova, who has directed it, and who is, I think, a brilliant woman, at the beginning of the play, the cast assemble on stage for a Q&A after the premiere of their Hamlet. They are in this alternative reality that was never allowed to happen because of the war, and they only gradually wake up and realize what has really happened. They find themselves trapped in a kind of limbo, and the sign that they are not in the reality, either the one they expected or completely in the same reality as the audience, is that when they draw the curtains behind them, they find red Christmas trees, red plastic Christmas trees. These are the sign of this alien reality they're in, and it's a comment on the nature of how alien the reality in which they find themselves is. And it becomes a kind of almost review show along the lines of Joan Littlewood's Oh What a Lovely War, about the experience of exile, of being a refugee, of not being a refugee, of trying to cope, of the various psychological strategies by which people cope with being bombed. Each member of the cast performs a variant on Hamlet's How All Occasions Do Inform Against Me soliloquy, the one about watching Fortinbras's War Machine, trying to make sense of all these war casualties and the struggle for territory. It's a fabulously absorbing play. Every single actor in it gets to do a virtuoso solo turn, if not several, and they do amazing things together. Wonderful piece where they are guided round an imaginary art gallery and shown Bruegel's painting of the blind leading the blind, where they're all blindfolded. It's really the most remarkable and detailed and intimate and witty as well as devastating presentation in very, very sharp focus of how people cope with finding themselves with their lives suspended while they try to endure a war. It's a play which I know because I have watched it on a video recording. They originally did it on tour. They originally did it at the Deutsche Theater in Berlin, and I've used that. I've taught it. I teach a course about international Shakespeare, and we do a whole week on Ukraine because the amount of Shakespeare, the quality of Shakespeare that's being done in Ukraine now is so remarkable. So my students absolutely love Holt. It was one of the texts they really respond to. It's this sort of absurd drama that's also docudrama. That's how you cope with an absurd reality. It's a splendid piece, and there's an actor in it who is one of the actors I admire most, a man called Ole Stefan. I saw his Prospero actually just after the last Craiova Festival. I went to the first Ukrainian International Shakespeare Festival in Ivano-Frankivsk, and he played Prospero for a director called Oksana Dmitrieva. And I think it's the most intelligent production of The Tempest I've ever seen. It was phenomenal, absolutely wonderful piece of work. Cut to 2 hours, beautiful edit, phenomenal acting, really fanciful and brilliant scenography. I hope it will stay in their repertory and that in times to come it'll come to Craiova too. The largest show I've seen here so far this time round was in this very building, the Marin Sorescu National Theatre, and that was Percorete's King Lear. And of course, a show greeted with tremendous anticipation. He is a sort of local hero. It was his Titus that was the first show in the first Craiova Festival in 1994, and I've seen amazing work he has done since. This is a characteristically absorbing and intelligent and detailed and provocative show. I was interested that the Percoretes shows I've seen before have always been on proscenium arch stages. They've been highly pictorial. You're at a little distance from what you're seeing on the stage. You're looking through into this extraordinary alternative reality where women wear paper Elizabethan dresses and people have clown white face, or they don't. Things are adjusted and turned up and changed, and it's very dreamlike. For this Lear, he had arranged the auditorium on the stage. I mean, with a stage this big, sometimes you do that. So we're on 3 sides of the acting area, and we're much closer to the actors than I'm used to being for a Percorete production. At the beginning of the play, there's a single actor sitting at a dining table. He is clearly being made to eat his dinner separately from the other characters, and it turns out this is Edmund the Bastard. That's why he is fed separately, and Gloucester and Kent turn up. The costuming is surprisingly realist. It's 19th century, very much 19th century Eastern Europe. It looks a bit, you could mistake it if you saw a still for a movie of Anna Karenina or something. Big coats, as I say, lots and lots of detail, candles on the table, lots of lovely food. When Lear returns, and Percorate is wonderful with extras. I mean, there's a whole team of household staff in rather grubby overcoats who are very good at registering moments of panic in the household, a sense of danger and disruption elsewhere. But they're very efficient at the beginning. They get the table off and they get it back on again. And the next course of the meal is King Lear's birthday cake. This Lear divides a huge 3-tier birthday cake with a sword by way of dividing up the map, and gives Goneril and then Regan a big bit of cake to represent their shares of the kingdom. And at this stage, the three sisters seem to be getting on really well. Three sisters, maybe that's what triggers all this slightly late 19th century looking stuff. They seem to be getting on fine. There doesn't seem to be an already existing problem between Goneril and Regan and Cordelia. They're all much of an age. It's true, Cornwall looks a bit sinister. He's in a wheelchair with an eye patch like a Bond villain. But other than that, everything in the garden's lovely until Cordelia refuses to make extravagant promises of love to Lear, and the story proceeds as usual. It's a very orthodox run-through of the text for the most part by Percorate standards until the very end. There are some wonderful touches in it. Some of the characters wear increasingly stylized costumes, and some of them do have that white face makeup, which one's used to. Cornwall has peculiar sort of painted on looking hair and very big reddish eyebrows. Albany. And I don't know whether that's to render the idea that he's vaguely red-headed because Albany means Scottish or not. But some fanciful costumes begin to emerge later. But for the most part, it's very narrative, it's very straightforward, and it's rather underpowered. This isn't a Titanic Lear. It's not about rage. It's not about being furious to discover that the whole system is unjust and illegitimate. Edgar, so far from being a spoiled, normal, healthy aristocrat who finds himself having to disguise himself, very surprisingly, as a naked beggar, when we first meet him, he's wearing just a white ballet leotard and he's walking on his toes. He's clearly a big ballet practitioner and fan. So becoming a naked beggar and disguising himself that way is sort of within his repertory already. He's rather affected and strange. Later, the sisters get increasingly out of hand. Cordelia consciously disguises herself as the fool. There's this long-running discussion as to whether in the original production the same performer will have played Cordelia and then reappeared as the fool, because they're never on stage at the same time, and the fool inexplicably vanishes before Cordelia comes back. In this production, Cordelia's just the kind of girl who would dress up as a fool if banished off to France. And that's what she does. She puts her hair up and just poses as the fool. And later, Regan, this is a very enjoyable moment when she is sending a love letter to Edmund, who is having illicit affairs with both of the older sisters. She's instructing her servant Oswald, and she has the line, take this to Edmund, he'll understand. In this, usually that's a letter. In this production, before she says that line, she's only wearing a slip apparently, and she's fumbling around underneath it. And instead of sending Edmund a letter, she just sends him her bra, having managed to take it off under her slip in mid-scene, which sort of says what one needs to know about that relationship really very effectively. The blinding of Gloucester is extremely graphic and elaborate. He is strapped down in Cornwall's wheelchair, and it's all very meticulously done with almost cinematic levels of realism. it's a bit polite, strangely. It doesn't smash the theatre, it doesn't tear the play to pieces. It's not that the contents of this story are so broken and so awful and so confrontational that you have to make the narrative so that the narrative doesn't work, so that the conventions of the theatre are ripped apart. It's all still pretty much under control, and Lear, as I say, is quite quiet. His big speeches in the storm aren't competing with huge claps of thunder. He's sort of calling on a storm that never quite materializes, either in him or in the soundscape. And it's only at the end, you know, I began to feel that maybe Percorete is above making audiences cry. You know, maybe he seemed to be so careful to be unsentimental about this Lear that it almost became emotionally unengaging. I didn't feel tempted to cry at any point. Usually, if I'm seeing a production of King Lear, if I'm not weeping during the recognition scene after the storm, when Lear recognizes Cordelia again, I'd want my money back. This time, you know, I got the ticket for free, so I couldn't demand my money back, but I did feel that there was something being deliberately cut out of this play, which essentially was really its heart. At the end, the dinner table reappears. Gloucester, instead of dying off stage, comes back, smokes another cigar, even though he's blind with everybody else. Lear doesn't quite die. Lear sits up at the table and has some roast chicken in front of him. Cordelia dies pretty much ignored down on the floor. Pray you undo this button is not Lear dying and trying to get more air, but it's Lear undoing her tunic and checking that it's really Cordelia, a woman, and not the fool. And then he goes back and gets on with his imaginary dinner. You don't know how to read this, whether it's a sort of posthumous fantasy or whether this is just an index for things resuming despite cataclysm, people being able to maintain appearances despite an apparent cataclysm, or perhaps Percorete doesn't think what happens in King Lear is anything to make a great fuss about. It's rather detached and cerebral, completely gripping. You know, you're always curious to see what happens next, and some fabulous acting in it. But for a King Lear, it doesn't leave you absolutely shattered and gasping and sobbing and convinced life's not worth living, as King Lear can, if let loose. But that, and it's so unlike the Titus, which is emotionally absolutely devastating. One thought, well, he did Titus back in '94, perhaps now he's back at the festival, this will be a kind of companion piece, but no, he's gone on somewhere else, which I found intriguing. What have I seen since then, if anything? There are some great things coming up. Oh, I saw essentially some student actors talking through Othello for Tang Shu Wing out at Calibri, which it was a great exercise for them, but it didn't really do anything for the audience. It was a sort of exercise, as I say. It was like watching a training exercise. They remembered all their words. They didn't speak them beautifully. They certainly didn't speak them passionately or in any way make contact with the other people in the room, but that's fine. I'm sure it was very good for them to come. I hope they saw lots of other exciting shows. I saw Lisa Wolpe's one-woman show, which is a fantastic thing, actually. She's very intriguing, very powerful, very, very able, and she produces this strange combination, because it's a very confessional, very confiding show. It tells the story of her engagement with Shakespeare. It shows off her range of being able to do different set pieces from Shakespeare, and it also tells the story of her family, which is a story about the Holocaust. It's a story of finding, really in her 40s, that she belonged to a Jewish family that had mainly been wiped out, and what she was going to do with that knowledge. And then she starts doing her Shylock, fantastically well. The interesting thing I find with Lisa Wolpe, who's American, she's run an all-female company in Los Angeles she's toured very extensively and she's highly articulate about gender in Shakespeare, about gender in live performance in general, is that while it's very intimate and you feel very close to her, you feel that she is genuinely sharing this stuff with you in a way perhaps closer than one would expect in a European theatre. At the same time, her style makes you feel as though you're in a theatre about 3 times as big as the one you're actually in, because she manages to combine the completely autobiographical and in the moment with a style that must be like that of John Barrymore. You know, she's tremendous arm gestures, she's always making great reaches with her voice, you know, lots of work with the arms, lots of different body language. You could really read that show from about half a mile away and you would still feel very close to her. I think that's a great trick if you can pull it off. I gather that this may be the last performance she ever gives of this show, so I'm very, very happy to have seen it and seen it here in the studio theatre here at the Marin Sorescu. Coming up, so many riches in this festival. I haven't had time to go down and see what's happening in the park yet at the Shakespeare Village, though I've talked about it a lot with some of the people who are in the Shakespeare Village who are waiting for 9 hours at Luton Airport with me and Flute Theatre. I've of course seen Flute Theatre do their 12th night games for autistic audiences and their families out at the agronomy faculty, which was wonderful and really makes one feel that some of the cerebral side of theatre is maybe a waste of time. It so completely takes you back to what playing actually is, because you're working with audiences who don't get to play and who are suddenly being shown how to play and wind up dancing with their own families, which is just an extraordinary thing to watch and very, very moving. It kind of made up for everything that was left out of Percorate's Lear, I think. So I will be going to Shakespeare Village. I'll be seeing things down there, whatever they may be, Elizabethan handicrafts, rock festivals, you name it. I will also be, today I'm seeing a Studio Antony and Cleopatra, which is a Romanian show about which I know absolutely nothing except that it's quite short.
Tiger Lilies today.
Oh, the Tiger Lilies in the evening, yes. No, I'm not going to miss the Tiger Lilies. They're doing their Macbeth song, which I'm sure will be wonderful. I mean, the Tiger Lilies are what music hall and vaudeville were always trying to become, and they finally made it with the Tiger Lilies. It'd be lovely to see them again. They're such a feature of the European festival circuit. I can't imagine what they do when there isn't a festival on somewhere, but that will be, I'm sure, a very absorbing show. I have various things to do. I'm giving a lecture. You know, everybody should come to the lecture in room 344. No, room 444, is it? Well, it's one of those rooms at the university anyway, where the academics have been corralled on the 28th, I think, in the morning, about Venus and Adonis, which I have offered to do because I've at last managed to persuade Sir Gregory Doran to come to Craiova, and he is bringing his puppet version of Venus and Adonis, Shakespeare's first and most popular narrative poem. Wonderful work. Greg did this 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, with a company called Little Angels from North London, who are a puppet company. What you get is a guitarist one side of the stage accompanying the action with some nice Elizabethan tunes on a guitar, and then on the other side of the stage an actor reading the poem or reciting the poem from memory, depending on how they're feeling that day. And on this occasion we get Sir Simon Russell Beale, which is fabulous because there's nobody speaks Shakespeare better than Simon Russell Beale. And in the middle, Bunraku, people in black operating almost life-size puppets which act out the action of the poem for you. And the action of Venus and Adonis is of course terribly graphic. It's Venus actually physically sexually assaulting Adonis, not only trying to persuade him to have sex with her using every trick English poetry can come up with, but also pulling him off his horse, climbing on top of him, wrestling with him, you know, getting nowhere, but the puppeteers have all kinds of fun trying. So it's an amazing tease of a show, puppets trying to have sex and not really succeeding. And then the tragic death of Adonis, who's killed by a huge boar, and there's a horse. It's a very engaging show. It's a fantastic poem, and this is a very good way of enjoying it. Anyway, so I will be there. That's happening on the last day of the festival out at Colibri, which is, of course, the puppet theatre, the children's theatre. And I am going to be presenting Greg with the festival prize this year, the International Festival Prize. And after the career he's had, and now that he has finally agreed to come to Craiova, I think he can be given it with a clear conscience. I've had quite a difficulty keeping the ceremony short enough, because every actor I talked to who's worked with Greg pretty much wanted to be involved and wanted to do something, or wanted to send something, or actually wanted to come and be in it. So I've been fighting them off, but also letting some of them in. It's a pity Judi Dench now has such poor eyesight that she can't travel nearly as freely as she did, but she is involved. Let's say that. Let's say that much. So that'll be a grand finale for the festival, at least as far as my own direct participation is concerned. But I know there are lots of other fabulous things that I'm going to be seeing. But there's so much now. 400 events in 10 days. One does feel rather overwhelmed. You never get much sleep at Craiova, but now you can lie awake thinking of all the things you missed over the previous 3 days, quite apart from anything else. What else have we got coming up? The Shakespeare's Apprentice, the playwriting competition. Oh, and of course, Cheek by Jowl. I mean, Declan Donnellan and Nick Ormerod bringing Two Gentlemen of Verona, which is a show they did in Spain, I think first a couple of years ago. Declan has told me that he has solved Two Gentlemen of Verona, and that he's very keen that everyone who's interested in that play should see this production, because he is convinced he has solved Two Gentlemen of Verona, which of course has a very problematic last scene where one of the gentlemen tries to give away his girlfriend to the other one who's just tried to rape her. I'll be very curious to see what Declan's solution is. He's if anybody can solve it, I'm sure he can, so I'll be keen to see it. Oh, one other event which is happening right here shortly, over the next couple of days. Emil Sărbulescu, the Craiova University professor who helped set up the academics talking about the festival aspect of the festival, so I'm very, very grateful to him, because I might never have started coming if it hadn't been for Emil. He is launching his new book, which is a memoir, fabulous book, in which he describes what it was like growing up as a Shakespeare scholar in the old days, the sort of Soviet-influenced period, what you were and weren't allowed to think or say about Shakespeare, and then the world changing and Shakespeare suddenly looking different, and all these other ways of thinking about Shakespeare and performing Shakespeare, and all these other places that were talking about Shakespeare gradually opening up to Emil. So he describes what it was like to go from communist Romania and find himself at the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington DC, and Stratford, and the way in which Shakespeare and the meanings of Shakespeare have reshaped themselves in different states of the world. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Philip Parr has just got an honorary doctorate this very morning, who's been a great prop of the festival. I think I've been ambushed by Philip Parr promenade productions in many places in the city over the last few years. I'm always very happy to be ambushed by Philip's productions, because in a way it's right that it should be Philip getting an honorary degree this year, because under Vlad Dragulescu the festival has so vividly and energetically embraced the idea that one of the things Shakespeare's plays are for is community engagement, getting people involved, getting civic identity mixed up with the plays. I would be very curious to see what happens if you come to Craiova in a non-festival year and try and talk with somebody in a shop about Shakespeare, whether it just happens for these miraculous 10 days or whether something of it lingers in the city all the rest of the time. But if Craiova does absolutely resonate with Shakespeare in its retirement homes, in its parks, in its schools, in its streets during the festival, it's very largely thanks to Philip Parr and the ways in which he has modelled how to stir up excitement about Shakespeare, how to bring in different constituencies into theatres and around theatres and processing past theatres in these ways. So I continue to be deeply impressed by the way in which this festival is run. I'm a bit lost now that the programme is so complex that it has to be on a website, because I can't find a calendar, I can't find where I'm supposed to be, and I've had to print out the academic stuff that I'm definitely involved in and kind of scrawl in the margins all the shows and all the other things that are happening around that. But it is a wonder of the world. Craiova, the way Craiova has embraced this festival as its great trick, its unique selling point, its novelty stunt that makes people talk about Craiova. It's become central to Shakespeare performance in the world. I mean, this is where I come every 2 years to get a snapshot of what Shakespeare is talking about at the moment. And it's fascinating. He's talking about war, he's talking about borders, he's talking about violence again. We live in very dark times, and there's some very dark Shakespeare resonating with them, and at the same time there's some very utopian work bringing communities together, doing comedy, thinking about how we might imagine making cross-border contact, getting along, making communities renew themselves. So hurrah for Craiova. I've just seen Emil Boragina this morning, the founder of this festival, extraordinary actor, an amazing man for whom I have a huge respect. He's very frail, he's very ill. When I first came to this festival in 2010, at the end of it, I promised Emil that I would continue coming to every single iteration of this festival while I was still strong enough to do so. I've kept that vow. I hereby renew it. I will continue coming. Emil said this morning he didn't know if he'd be here at the next festival, and I said, well, I will, as I promised, I will keep coming back to the festival, and if I don't see you here, I will look for your spirit here in the festival. I look forward to continuing to find it and continuing to find Emil himself for as long as that may be possible. I owe him an enormous amount, as does everyone in Craiova and everyone who cares about live Shakespeare around the world.